Tonight, our featured guests are Tanya Tomkins, a cellist and co-founder and artistic director of Valley of the Moon Music Festival, and Eric Zivian, a forte pianist and co-founder and music director of the Valley of the Moon Music Festival. We're also pleased to be joined tonight by Dr. Lino Rivera, professor of music at St. Mary's College of California. Welcome, Tanya.
Hi, nice to be here.
Tanya, tell us a little bit about yourself, please, and how you got into music, why you became a professional musician.
So that's an interesting question, why I became a professional musician. I did it against the strong advice of my father, who was a scientist, who was really thrilled that I could play music when I was a kid, but he warned me, never become a professional musician. It's a terrible life. You know, you're going to want to do something different. Unfortunately, he died when I was 13, and I was left with my mother, who was a wonderful artist and singer, and she loved the arts, and she wanted nothing more than her two daughters to go into the arts. And so we both did. And in fact, my sister also founded a music festival in Moab, Utah. She's a violist in New York, and she has a wonderful festival in Moab, which is partly why we started our festival in Sonoma 8 years ago. But I did become a cellist. I started on piano, and I really wanted to play the violin, but for family reasons, I played the cello, and we did a lot of chamber music at home. And my father, when he was around, would come home from his long day as a scientist, and he would pick up any instrument in the house and just start improvising. He was a jazz musician, a very good one. And so we did a lot of family music at home, and it was just a part of it was like breathing for me to have music around me and to be playing music. It made me feel good to do it. It was grounding. And so it felt like a natural thing to just keep doing it. And before I knew it, I was doing it professionally, and I didn't ever get my real job that my father hoped that I would get.
And what does that mean then when you were a professional? When did you know that you were a professional musician?
Well, you know, I moved to Holland when I was 23. So I graduated from USC and CalArts, and then I went to Banff Center for the Arts in Canada. And my teachers said to me, okay, you're ready. Let's audition for orchestras. Go for it. And I was like, no, I'm not ready at all. I was not ready to be professional, just mentally. I didn't want to get a job right away. And so I decided to move to Amsterdam at that point, and I studied another 5 years in Amsterdam with the great cellist Arne Belsma there, and learned a ton from him and drove him around. I drove his wife, Vera Betts, the great violinist, all around Europe, the two of them, watching them giving all these fantastic concerts and seeing what they did before and after concerts and hanging out with them and all their great musician friends, and having a lot of time with them, being kind of an apprentice to them. And that was such a wonderful part of my life. And in fact, I never really wanted to become truly professional. I was just happy just being around music and being in Amsterdam and rehearsing and doing fun stuff. But I did end up playing in a string quartet, and I ended up subbing in orchestras and doing all kinds of things. So in my 20s, when I was living in Amsterdam, is when I started to become professional, and I would teach and do all the things that musicians do to make money.
How exciting. Wow. So Eric, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Eric, so can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you met Tanya?
Yeah, so, well, I was really into music from when I was little, and I loved reading through lots of music on the piano, and then I practiced a lot of piano when I was a teenager, and I also composed music, and I would say my being a professional musician was just like playing different music and composing music and doing a lot of different things. I always was interested in forte pianos and period music, but until I met Tanya, I never really did anything about it. I met Tanya when she moved back from Holland after 14 years to California. And the first thing we did actually together was play Rachmaninoff Sonata and modern instruments. And then we got to know each other and moved in together and started to play together, and then started to do the Beethoven sonatas on forte piano and cello. And then, you know, that was about at the turn of the century. So it's been about a little over 20 years. And so we just knew somebody in common, right, Tanya? There was yeah. So and then that's how we got introduced, and then I was very excited about Tanya. Really helped me to get to know the forte piano and to make the connections so that we now own a couple of instruments, pianos and things like that.
Okay, so you mainly were a modern pianist before you met Tanya.
That's right, and I've never, I had a lot of teachers in modern piano, but I'm an autodidact on forte piano. I never studied forte piano with anybody. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So let's take a look right away at Tanya performing on a Baroque cello. Okay, so that brings us to our first round table. What is early music? According to Apple's dictionary, that is, rather than edition version 2.3.0, quote, early music is a noun which indicates medieval, Renaissance, and early Baroque music, especially as revived and played on period instruments. For example, a recital of early music, or as a modifier, an early music society, end quote. Though Apple's dictionary definition includes early Baroque music, probably meaning until about the advent of opera around 1600, today we just heard Tanya playing Johann Sebastian Bach's music, which is considered late Baroque music. What are Tanya's and Eric's definitions of early music, and is it significant that the repertoire of early music performers seems to include ever more music from ever later composers? Tanya?
Well, thank you for that definition, because I always wondered about it myself. I think I'll just speak from total personal experience about what early music means to me. As a cellist, I worked very hard in my teens and my 20s to be able to do say what's called vibrato. Probably everybody here knows what that is, but it's when you vibrate each note. And I worked and practiced really hard to get that vibrato to connect from one note to the next without having any interruption in it at all. And then when I got to Holland, when I was 23, way back in 1984, I went to a concert, which was Orchestra of the 18th Century. It was conducted by the great recorder player, Franz Bruggen. And what did I hear? Not Baroque music, but a classical symphony. It was a Mozart symphony. I'll never forget that moment, because I heard Mozart like I had never heard it before. All the woodwinds blended so beautifully. It was on period instruments, and the violins were not loud because of the gut strings. They weren't projecting over everything else, and neither were the oboes and the upper voices in the orchestra. They were slightly toned down, and you could really hear the bass. And for me, that blend and that voicing and that balance changed the music entirely. And suddenly for me, it was also a beautiful performance, but it just brought that music to life in a way that made me understand it much better than I had before. I always thought before, and I hate to admit this now, but Mozart sounded childish and a little bit sort of inane or something to me. I didn't understand the drama until I heard it on those period instruments, and it just revealed something so different and more exciting to me. And so for me, early music, it is a controversial term, because, for instance, there's an early music festival right out our door here in Berkeley, and for years they didn't want us to play on it because we do all this late stuff like Schumann and Brahms and everything, and they're like, wait a minute, that doesn't belong here. But now, of course, in Europe they were doing that for a long time, and here they're starting to do it much more as well. And at our festival we'll go all the way up to like Stravinsky on gut strings and using a Chickering piano from the turn of the last century. So it can mean all different things. There's a difference between performing on historical instruments that reveals something new in the music. And then there's the idea of early music, how the whole movement started by, oh, well, maybe this sort of more ancient music would sound really different if it was performed on a harpsichord, say, or on these older instruments than just sort of doing it on the modern instruments that we know today.
Okay, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that what period music or early music means today is just going back to playing on instruments that were like the ones that the music was composed for, and that could be even like in the early 20th century, like we do sometimes, or anything before that, all the way back. I had a similar experience to Tanya listening to Mozart symphony. I didn't get to put it into practice so soon because I was doing other things. Like I was studying composition at Yale when I heard this recording of the Mozart Jupiter Symphony. And unlike Tanya's experience, I actually didn't like the interpretation of the piece, but I could hear the instruments. I heard, even though I didn't really like the way that they were interpreting the music, the conductor was interpreting the music, I really loved to hear the instruments playing just the same way that Tanya did, hearing the winds and everything with total clarity. And I realized how much more appropriate that music of Mozart was played on the period instruments. And not that the instruments were perfect at the time, but that those were the instruments that they had in mind, and so they wrote with them in mind. And so a lot of things kind of work that don't work on modern instruments.
Okay, are there any questions? Yes, Dr. Davis.
Hi, thank you very much for taking the question, Sim. I have a question for Tanya. I watched her play the cello a little bit ago, and thank you very much for a wonderful experience. But I noticed your hand holding the bow is totally different than I've ever seen before.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a
Way up.
way up on the bow. Most people hold it at the base of the bow.
That's right.
And so,
Yeah.
why do you do that? Where did you learn it? And does it make it easier to play?
So in that video that we just watched of me playing that prelude to the Bach suite, I'm using a Baroque bow. And so it's a much lighter bow than the bows that you would normally see where we hold it down on the frog. And later you'll see me holding the bow normally. But with the Baroque bow, it has a very light tip. And so the balance point of it is a little bit different. And so if you watch a lot of Baroque musicians perform, you'll see that a lot of them hold it way up on the stick like that. And that's just the way that we choose where to hold the bow is where the balance point is on that bow. So that bow had that balance point right there. And that thing about having a very light tip on a Baroque bow is important because what happened as the bow developed is it became easier to smooth that sound out all the way across the bow and sustain that sound. And without the power of the modern bow, without being able to do that, it makes you play differently and sort of more rhetorically, more dancey. And that can be considered more appropriate to Baroque music, to have that capability of lifting and dancing more rather than sustaining every note perfectly, which is how we work so hard as string players to be able to do that. Then you have to forget everything about it and try something different.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sim. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Okay, let's take a look at now Eric's performance. This is Beethoven's Sonata, Opus 2, number 3. Fantastic. So, Eric, so I'd like to ask you to tell us about this instrument you play it on. But before you do it, I want to hear not yet another one. Like you said, you have several pianos or precursors to the piano in your room. So this in your home. So let's listen to a later sonata of Beethoven. This is the Hammerklavier Sonata. Fantastic. So Eric, tell us a little bit about these instruments and how they're different to the modern piano.
Yeah, so the first instrument you heard there was a copy made in the 1980s by a couple living in Berkeley. Janine Johnson, the they used to be married, not anymore, but she still lives in Berkeley and works at John Phillips Harpsichord Studio. She and her husband Paul Poletti made some pianos back then that were, and this one is modeled on an instrument from 1795, which is really right about the time that Beethoven wrote that Opus 2 No. 3 sonata. That one you didn't see any pedals. That's because those are knee pedals. And so I'll tell you more about both pianos in a minute. But that's an interesting feature of that piano. The other piano is an instrument from 1841, a little bit later than Beethoven is, so a little bit later than Beethoven died, but still not like a modern piano at all. That's what we had in our house, and I recorded all the Beethoven sonatas for our festival. You can find them online. They're all live. I never worked on them after it performed them. They're all live performances. So that's from 1841. They're both Viennese instruments. This 1841 one is a actual original instrument from 1841, but they're both Viennese instruments, very light action. So that's one big difference. They're much easier to play in terms of just sheer, you don't need as much sheer strength to play every note. And that's helpful for a piece like the Hammerklavier Sonata, I'd say. And then also for recording all 32 in the same year. But in any case, the other really most important difference between them and the modern piano is that those pianos have no metal frame. That means they have to be tuned pretty much a couple times a day to stay in tune, because they're not nearly under as much pressure. And then also it means that the sound is quieter and less. And also the registers are very distinct, and that's partly because of the fact that until about the 1860s or 1870s, nobody tried to cross the bass and the treble strings. So in both of these pianos, the strings go straight down, and so that means that the bass and the treble registers are very distinct from each other. So all in all, it creates a very different sound. As you heard, by 1841, they were trying to create a richer sound, and it's a bigger range. It sounds a bit more like a modern piano, but still not really. The older instruments sounded a little bit more like harpsichords, even though the mechanism is a piano mechanism with the hammers hitting the strings. You get the full range of volume from soft to loud, but the sound is a little bit more like a harpsichord, especially in that early instrument. And then the 1841 instrument is somewhere in between.
Okay, now let's have a listen to you performing the modern piano, and let's see if we can tell a difference. Okay, so tell us, I don't know if about anybody else, but it sounds to me like, wow, that was, I mean, the full expressive Eric. As a pianist, we hear all of those things, even though the recording doesn't sound as good. I imagine the microphone technology wasn't set up as well or something, but it seems like you have this full power of expressiveness at your fingers. What do you feel when you hear that difference between those recordings, Eric?
Well, I mean, the Debussy was written for a modern piano, although one of the things that I would always like to do, being a kind of early music person, is I have not had a chance to play Debussy on the pianos that he wrote for, which were basically very similar to a Steinway in many respects, but they sounded a bit different, the French pianos that is. So I'd like to try that sometime. But basically, Debussy really wrote for the modern piano, and so it sounds so beautiful that way. When I listen to the other pieces, I feel like, especially like listening to the Hammerklavier, which many people would think like would sound better on modern piano, but I don't think so. We don't have a comparison here of me playing it on modern piano, but I feel like it's easier to play it faster and lighter, and to get the full range of expression for that music playing it on the 1841 instrument than it would be on modern piano. But I love playing modern piano, and I think it's a great instrument.
Well, fantastic. That's good, because we have all of the options are available. So let's have a listen now to Tanya talking about the difference between a modern and a Baroque cello, or excuse me, a period cello.
Hi, I'm Tanya Tomkins. I'm about to leave for Portland today. I'm about to get on a plane, and I'm so looking forward to doing this chamber music with Monica and everybody else from Portland Baroque Orchestra. Really kind of late music for what the orchestra usually does. We'll be doing Brahms and Mendelssohn, and this kind of music on original instruments is my very favorite thing to do. And I'm just going to show you why. I just played over the summer the Brahms G major sextet on modern instruments. So here I have a cello with steel strings tuned to the modern pitch, and we played it with everybody vibrating, a really brilliant sound, and because of the instruments, we played louder than we really needed to. So this is what I'm really looking forward to on the old instruments, is not playing so loudly and having this beautiful blend emerge. But this is how it sounds on the steel strings, the beautiful cello opening, when I get the melody, which is about, I don't know, 50 bars into the first movement of the Brahms sextet. So it sounds nice, it's easy to play on the steel strings, but now I'm going to show you with the gut strings and the lower pitch. It makes you play in a completely different way, and if you can imagine 6 of us all playing together in this totally different way, we're going to make this group sound that's going to be so different than what I did in the summer. Much quieter, and there's a lot more room for possibilities in the palette, and that's what I can't wait to do with everyone. So start our rehearsals and see what we do with this different color.
Okay. So okay, fantastic. So tell us a little bit about the 2 cellos, Tanya, and tell us about your comment. You seem very biased to the Baroque cello. You even call the modern cello too loud. I've only heard that said about electric instruments, like an electric guitar or something. So tell us about these different cellos. Tell us about tell us about your experience with them, and even when you're playing the Baroque cello, it seems like you change so many aspects of your performance. Why is that?
So First of all, I, like Eric, I like playing on modern instruments as well. And I do it half of the time. I was on your program with the Delphi Trio, and that's on modern instruments. And we have a lot of fun together doing that repertoire and even earlier repertoire on the modern instruments. So it's a bias in a way. I think I have a very personal take on all of this, partly because I am a cellist. And, you know, we started out by talking about the bass section being able to emerge from the Mozart symphony in a way that I hadn't heard before, and having that fundamental sound of the bass line really informing the whole score of an orchestra, that makes such a difference, rather than that getting completely obscured by the melodic line, which then it sort of erases a lot of the great stuff that happens in the music from my point of view. And so with a Brahms sextet, when you get all these fabulous, brilliant violinists, I believe I had played it in Moab at my sister's festival, they get these incredible players from New York, and they are just like on fire, and they're amazing. And they're playing at top volume, top vibration, top projection. And so what happens is, when you're a cellist in a group like that, you're finding yourself playing louder and louder and louder, so that everybody is vibrating as hard as they can. You're making this incredible, ringing, crazy sound with the 6 string players, and it's just like going to take off and go into outer space. And it's super exciting, and it's super charged, and it's very exciting for the audiences. It's really good in a big hall. So take away all that stuff, get a lower pitch, or even not the lower pitch, but put the gut strings on. And I was using the same bow, and I was holding it just like I held the other bow. And you suddenly approach the string differently, because with the steel string, you've got the hair, and it's very easy to connect that sound. It's at a higher tension. The bridge is at a higher tension. The steel string is at a higher tension. So it pops right out when you put that hair on it and you draw the bow. It just, the sound pops out. With the gut string, you have to coax the sound out. So the hair hits that raw gut, and that gut has a lot of texture to it. So you have to grab it in a different way. Every single note that you play, it shortens the length of the string. So then you have to grab it in a slightly different way when the string length is shortened, or when it's an open string, you pull it in a different way. So you're very attuned to how you're making a sound with your bow on those gut strings. By necessity. To make a good sound on those gut strings, you have to be really subtle about how you approach that string. And just by doing that, it makes you play completely differently. And it makes your ear sort of slow down. And when all of us played together and we used very little vibrato, the chords of the piece that Brahms wrote, that sextet, they would stack up in a certain way where they start resonating by themselves, rather than us like putting on constant vibrato to get it to vibrate in this really spinning, exciting way. So you experience the piece completely differently. So, you know, maybe I'm biased because as a cellist, having played Beethoven sonatas and all of these things with modern piano, and that was my training, most of my training was about how to project my sound over that big sound of a modern piano, over an orchestra, over whatever I was in front of. Or if I'm in an orchestra, you've got to play loudly. And when we get on the gut strings, and when the violins, when their volume is toned down that much, then you find yourself thinking about all different textures and colors that just aren't available when you're thinking more about projecting your sound. And I'm sure people like one better than the other, or maybe you can like them both. I like them both. I just prefer playing on the gut strings a little bit more.
Okay, let's hear Tanya play a little bit of modern cello with modern strings. Lovely. Wow. Well, it wasn't too loud for me. I think that's just a lovely, beautiful playing. So that moves us to our second round table. Why period instruments? An important part of your current work is programming and producing the Valley of the Moon Music Festival, which just finished its 8th season. You advertise Valley of the Moon Music Festival as hashtag music with guts. And next to the mission and vision of Valley of the Moon Music Festival, there is a conspicuous question printed. The question is, quote, why period instruments? And that is followed by the statement, quote, all music is performed on period instruments or authentic reproductions from the time the music was written. Composers such as Mozart, Beethoven, Schumann never heard their music played on a modern concert grand piano or on string instruments with nylon or metal strings. Their pianos were woodier and their violins and cellos had gut strings. The sound was more natural, delicate, and had a subtlety almost impossible to achieve on modern instruments, end quote. But music historians such as Robert Greenberg disagree with the notion that composers preferred the instruments that they had available to the modern instruments of today. For example, Greenberg writes about the piano music we heard Eric perform, quote, Beethoven's 32 piano sonatas are not simply compositions for the piano, but are about the developing technology of the piano itself, an evolving instrument that Beethoven pushed to its limits and then beyond, ultimately writing music for an idealized piano that didn't come into existence until some 40 years after his death, end quote. So Tanya and Eric, and let's start with Eric. Why period instruments?
Well, so I think Tanya and I were looking at each other while you were reading the Robert Greenberg quote. So we both agree with part of it, which is that Beethoven was very interested in improving, quote unquote, improving the piano. And there were certain things that really frustrated him about the pianos that he had to work with. So there's no doubt about that. And he was always looking for more powerful instruments and instruments that had more legato. So that is true. However, I completely disagree with the idea that he was writing for an idealized instrument that came into being 40 years later. That assumes that the idealized instrument that Beethoven might have had in his mind is the modern piano. And that, I think, is not true. I don't think that, I think he had an instrument in mind that was like the instrument that he had, but with certain things a little bit changed, like maybe a little bit more power in the upper register or certain things like that. But he didn't have in mind the sound of the modern piano with the steel frame because he really couldn't have imagined it. So he couldn't have been writing for that instrument. And so I think that if you go back to the instruments of Beethoven's day and play Beethoven, you might have to struggle with some of the things that Beethoven struggled with. And at the same time, there's other things that are going to be so much easier and so much more expressive on that instrument because that was the instrument that he actually knew. Much as he might have wanted to improve it, that was the instrument he knew, and that's why he spaced the chords the way he did, why he wrote the music the way he did. Then again, there might be certain passages, a few, I don't think there are very many, but there might be a few passages that even sound better on modern piano. If you play Beethoven on a historical piano and then you go and play it on modern piano, you're going to play it differently, and you might get some of those special advantages from playing it on the modern piano for certain passages, but then also for the entire piece, you'll have experienced it on the instrument that he was writing it for, and then you'll play it differently on modern piano too. So I'm all in favor of continuing to play Beethoven and all these other composers on modern instruments as well, but it's very advantageous for all of us pianists at least to have the chance to try it on the period instruments before we do that. And I still feel like all in all, it's a more pleasurable experience to listen and to play the pieces on the period instruments.
Okay, Tanya, why period instruments?
Well, something interesting happened in this program, and I have to make an apology, which is that I sent you that Chopin as an example of me playing on the modern instruments with the steel strings. And as I was looking at it, I was like, oh no, actually I was on gut strings. I'm sorry.
Apology
I didn't do that.
accepted.
Okay. And I do play on the steel strings, but in that case, the reason why that happened is that Jeff Leder, that wonderful pianist that you heard I was playing with, and I were going to be doing a recital on the old, I was going to play the Chopin Sonata with him on the forte piano, like a week later, but we wanted to record the pieces for a series that asked us to record them on modern instruments, because that particular presenter, who will remain nameless, can't stand historical instruments. So he's like, no, you guys got to play it on the modern for me. So we did. So I'm like, oh gosh, what am I going to do? I'm like preparing it on the gut strings, but here I've got to go play it with a modern piano. So I played in the modern style on the gut strings. So you didn't notice, but it does sound nice. And I think we can remember also, Eric was pointing out to me too, that Heifetz, Casals, all these people were playing on gut strings. So even in the 20th century, there was a lot of gut string playing. And I think if you listen back to those people, there's even old recordings of Chrysler, there's a kind of wonderful expression that comes out that is harder to emulate on the steel strings. It's just become a different art form on the steel strings. And it's not a lesser art form at all. I think there's been a lot of progress. And there are so many incredible players now, and people can pretty much do anything. And I think, as Eric said, at least to have the opportunity to try the other setup, or at least to listen to people playing on that opens up everybody's ears. For instance, when I was in my 20s, I was studying in Holland and I was learning all about this stuff. And then I would come back and I would play with people and they'd be like, what are you doing? Like, you're not vibrating enough, and like, oh, your sound is strange, and, like, fit in better. Now, people that age, they grew up listening to us doing this, and it's in their sound world, in their minds. So it's not weird to them, and they're interested in it. Sometimes they'll grab a Baroque bow and play their Bach on the steel strings with a Baroque bow, or it's less specialized now. And it's sort of more just a part of mainstream music making, that there is this other way on historical instruments that kind of has informed everybody at this point. I think it's hard to get away from it.
Okay.
And
yes, Eric, please.
No, I was just going to say that it's also about different people have different aesthetics. And oddly enough, I listened to a performance of that same Brahms G major sextet that Tanya was playing in her Portland Baroque video that you watched. And I heard a performance of that when I was going to music school. And even though I knew almost nothing about early music at all in those days, I heard these great players play. And I thought, why are they vibrating so much? I can't hear the music. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't. And so probably that's just, I gravitated towards this early music style, partly because just naturally I liked I didn't like something about the modern sound, and I liked something more about the old sound.
Okay. So I would like to bring in Professor Lino Rivera of St. Mary's College of California. But first, I just want to congratulate you on Valley of the Moon Music Festival being chosen for a finalist of the San Francisco Classical Voice Audience Choice Awards. So I understand that you've been nominated 8 times for the last season. I'm going to put this in the chat room in case anybody would like to take a look later. They can also vote if they want. And so now, Lino.
Yes, Eric and Tanya, it's so good to see you and having you here in this show. Eric, I have a question for you regarding how much you adjust in your interpretation, in your technique, when playing on a period instrument as opposed to a modern grand piano. I know it takes a lot of adjustment. How long does it take you? How much does it change your interpretation of the piece? And then I'll have another comment later after your answer.
It took me a long time to, I really enjoyed playing forte piano, and I feel like I adjusted to it in fundamental aspects pretty quickly once I started playing, but then it took me many years to make the full adjustment where I felt completely comfortable playing the forte piano. Now it just feels to me like another piano. We pianists get used to playing on different instruments more than other instrumentalists, and so I was used to playing on different modern pianos, all of which are pretty different from each other, not as different as a forte piano. But so now it's just a little bit like going back from one to another. How does it change what I do? I'm not really even so much aware of that anymore. I kind of, when I learn a new piece, I often will learn it first on the forte piano, then I'll try to play it in modern piano, and then I'll go back to the forte piano again. And I find that that sort of naturally gets to all the different things into my system. I feel like I don't play that differently anymore in terms of interpretation. In terms of what my body does, you have to use a lot more power in the modern piano. You're doing different things. You might be using more arm weight. And the pedaling might be a little different, especially than the knee pedals from the early piano. But I don't really think very much about how I'm playing differently anymore on the two different kinds of, or the many different kinds of instruments. I just sort of sit down and I have an idea of what I want to hear, and I try to do it. And then if I learn a piece in multiple instruments, I know that helps me to understand different things about how to play it on the different instruments.
And the comment I have is, I noticed also a difference between a New York Steinway as opposed to a Hamburg Steinway. I think, with regards to the power and the intensity, the New York Steinway has a lot more power, a lot more oomph. And then you play a Hamburg Steinway and it's a lot mellower. And I think, don't you think, and I just want your opinion here, that the Europeans have a different concept of sound than we Americans?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's probably true. I don't think that much about instruments when I play them, but I think that that's probably true based on my experience. If I haven't played that many Hamburg Steinways in my life, I've played many more New York Steinways. They're all also different from each other, but in general, I do think the Hamburg Steinways have a mellower sound. The Bösendorfers probably also have a mellower sound than the New York Steinways. I'm not sure that I necessarily like that better, by the way. If you play a Steinway from the late 19th century, an American Steinway, I actually think that sounds a little bit more like a forte piano than either a Hamburg or a modern New York Steinway. It's a little bit more articulate. Now, the modern New York Steinway might be louder in a way that's not really necessary and maybe a little overdone. But this a little bit more articulate than the Hamburg Steinway, and that may be a little bit more like a Steinway from the 1880s or like a forte piano from the 19th century. They had, oddly, even in the height of the Romantic period, a slightly more classical, clear sound in those days. So my favorite Steinways are actually New York Steinways from the 1890s, of the ones that I've tried.
Okay, so this brings us to our last question of the evening. What does the future of classical music look like to you? Tanya, why don't we start with you?
Well, one of the things that we do at Valley of the Moon Music Festival is we have this apprenticeship program, and we have 5 young artists with us for the duration of the festival, and we're coaching them and we're playing with them and collaborating with them. And every year it's a different group, and every year they just seem to get more and more talented and curious and amazing and wonderful people and great communicators. They're by this time so good at their instruments. I feel like it's like gymnastics or something. Like, people just are getting better and better at playing these instruments, and they're so versatile. And it's really a hard world that they're coming into. So we create this wonderful environment of exploration and experimentation, and we're performing together and we're trying different stuff. And we try to be really different from a lot of conservatories that they're coming from, in terms of, like, we want them to make mistakes and we dare them to take risks and all this. And it's not about perfection, and it's not, even though we are recording things, it's not about making the recording. It's about just exploring these instruments and these strings and everything else, and coming together and feeling the music anew. And so when we work with these young guys, I feel a lot of hope for the future of classical music. And people complain a lot. It's sort of an old song that I've been hearing for so long, that the audiences are so old. How are we going to get the audiences to be younger? They're going to die out. But this has been a problem for 25 years. So clearly, they're not dying out. They're becoming replaced. When people are in their 30s and 40s, they have kids and full-time jobs, and they have to pay for babysitting, and they're exhausted, and they're probably not going to go to a concert at night, a classical music concert that requires, sitting and being somewhat pensive, and there's the risk of falling asleep if you're just too exhausted or whatever. And then once the kids are gone and maybe you're retired, it seems like that's a time that people are drawn to coming to these kinds of concerts. It seems to be consistent, and I'm not so worried that I think classical music will probably be around as long as our planet is around. That might be the thing to worry about a little bit more at this point, I would say.
Okay, Eric?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I agree. I feel good about the future of classical music, just working with these young people, because they are so much more open to all sorts of different styles, not just the period style that we're teaching them, but all sorts of jazz and popular music of all kinds, and they kind of fiddling and all these kinds of things. And most people that I knew when I was going to music school weren't doing any of that either, and all of it really has an influence on their playing and broadens what they can do, and they're just so open to different ideas. There was a kind of a way that people played piano and people played string instruments when we were going to school, and there wasn't a lot of openness to different things. And now I feel like the young people that we work with and all over are just so open, and I think that's really great.
Okay, let's see how we can stay in touch with Tanya and Eric. This is the website of Valley of the Moon Festival. So people can reach out to you right here. Is that right, Tanya and Eric?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
And so there it is, info@valleyofthemoonmusicfestival.org. And so people can ask you all sorts of questions about forte pianos and gut strings.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, so I will put that right here in the meeting for everyone so they can see that. So thank you so very much to Tanya Tomkins and to Eric Zivian.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
It was great to be here.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at what's coming up next Wednesday. There it is. It is Kieko Okabe, Jorma Silvasti, and Kaisa Makonnen. Opera from Savonlinna. The city of Savonlinna is what many of us picture when we imagine Finland. It is small, hospitable, surrounded by forests and lakes, and filled with cultural activities. The Olavinlinna Castle is the center of the city and also a fortress island that symbolizes the heart of the Saimaa Lake region, one of the largest bodies of fresh water in Europe. So it's fitting that Olavinlinna Castle also hosts Finland's most prestigious opera festival. Let's get to know Savonlinna by meeting three of the city's celebrated singers, sopranos Kieko Okabe and Kaisa Makonnen, and tenor Jorma Silvasti. Come welcome Kieko, Kaisa, and Jorma to our show. As always, all information about upcoming shows is available at www.simeonmoro.com. Again, that is next Wednesday, Kieko Okabe, Jorma Silvasti, and Kaisa Makonnen, opera from Savonlinna. Once again, thank you so very much to Tanya Tomkins and Eric Zivian. Thank you to Lino Rivera. Thank you to Agnieszka and Benoit Rivole for their support of this show. Most of all, thanks to you, our participants who make it all worthwhile. From New London, New Hampshire, in the Bay Area, California, goodbye, and see you next Wednesday.
Bye. Thank you.